So good evening, shalom, or good day, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's so very impressive to have people from all over the world attending. And I would really like to thank the reading room of the National Library for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you. I will try to give you a glimpse of the work of the Department of the Righteous Among the Nations at Yad Vashem, which I had the great privilege of heading for 11 years, and to look into some of the rescue stories. Of course, it's going to be only glimpses. It's a vast subject, and I try to shed light on some of the more, to my opinion, interesting aspects of this very particular program. It connects the past and the present, and it is a blend of history and memory. And I will try to show the different areas. But let's begin 76 years ago in January 1945. The war is almost over. The German army, the Wehrmacht, is retreating on all fronts. And nevertheless, the determination of Nazi Germany to destroy the last Jews in Europe did not diminish. And they set out to search for the Jews in all that are still left, and they take the inmates in the camps as they retreat. They take the inmates, they evacuate the inmates from the camps and in the east and take them to the west, back to Germany. Let me now share my presentation. Ooh, hold on. Yeah. So let's begin and look at the camp of Stutthof, one of these camps in the east. It was a camp that was close to the city of what was then Danzig, today Gdansk, and some 50,000 inmates were taken on death marches with hardly any food, no clothing, going in the snow, no rest, freezing cold with no proper clothes, only very often their inmate uniform, and under the blows of the guards, whoever could not continue was shot. In this very area, you see the traces of the death marches, was one death march of women. The local population, mostly Germans, saw them as they were dragging themselves through the snow, but they were also seen by a group of British prisoners of war who were in a camp in the area. And one of them, Willie Fisher, kept a diary on scraps of paper he could find, and on January 26, exactly 76 years to the day ago, he described what he saw. And he wrote, "I have seen today the filthiest, foulest, and most cruel sight of my life. At 9 a.m. this morning, a column straggled down the road towards Danzig, a column far beyond the words of which I'm capable to describe. I was struck dumb with a miserable rage, a blind coldness, which nearly resulted in my being shot. They came straggling through the bitter cold, about 300 of them, limping, dragging footsteps, slipping and falling, to rise and stagger under the blows of the guards. In that column was also Gita Matuson and her two daughters, Sarah and Hannah. They were originally from Shavli in Lithuania. And after being in the ghetto, they were taken to Stutthof, and now they were being evacuated on this death march. At some point, 16-year-old Sarah managed to slip away from the column to escape. And she came into a farm and was looking for food, but she went into a barn and she simply collapsed with exhaustion. And this is where one of the POWs who was working in that farm found her. He contacted his colleagues and they decided to smuggle her into the camp, into their barracks, and hide her there. Now think of these POWs. They were taken prisoner in 1940. They were over 4 years in captivity. They saw what was going on. They saw the retreat. They realized that soon the war would be over and they would probably be able to go home. So this is a situation where normally you would say, let's keep a low profile, let's be careful to make sure that we survive until the end of the war. Nevertheless, they decided to help this young woman, this 16-year-old girl, which was extremely dangerous. I remind you, Willie Fisher even said that he almost got shot because he was so enraged by the sight. And so they lovingly cared for her, 10 British prisoners of war, and this young girl, they washed her, they fed her, they brought paraffin oil in order to kill the lice that infested her body. And they took care of her until they too were evacuated westward and found a farmer who was willing to take care of her. Sarah survived thanks to these 10 prisoners of war. After the war, she went to the United States and she took on the name of her sister who had perished, Hannah, and from that moment on, she was called Hannah Matuson, and later on her married name was Riegler. In 1972, she managed to trace down the 10 prisoners of war, and she reunited with them. And we have, there you have a photo of the two girls of the Matuson family. But here you have the reunion in 1972 when she found and visited all these prisoners of war. Alan Edwards, one of them, went back and visited the barn and where the whole event took place. And in 1989, she turned to Yad Vashem and had them recognized as righteous among the nations. She came with them to Yad Vashem. Here you have the photos of the ceremony where they planted a tree in the Avenue of the Righteous. So they were recognized as righteous among the nations for this rescue of Hannah Riegler. So what is this title? What is this Yad Vashem title of Righteous Among the Nations? Yad Vashem was formally established in 1953 by a law of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And it's here you have an excerpt from the law. The language, I took the language as it is officially, then there is hereby established in Jerusalem a memorial authority, Yad Vashem, to commemorate the 6 million members of the Jewish people. Then it goes on, the Jewish families. And paragraph 9 says, the righteous among the nations who risked their lives to save Jews. And this was the establishment of this program. And the righteous, when they're recognized, receive a medal, they receive a certificate of honor. They can plant a tree in the Avenue of the Righteous. When they came, like the prisoners of war, the former prisoners of war, it should be said, to Yad Vashem. And you have here photos from the dedication of the Avenue of the Righteous, where Golda Meir represented the Israeli government. And in later years, as the list grew, a garden was established where the names are engraved on the walls of honor. And here you have photos of the garden and of ceremonies taking place. But I would like to, beyond these more technical description, I think we should look at the full significance of this award. And I believe it is not self-evident that in 1953, 8 years after the end of the war, the state of Israel, the Jewish people, the survivors who pushed for the establishment of this award, decided to create such an award. It was 8 years after the war. The wounds were still open. The loss, the enormous loss, everybody was struggling with the total abandonment and betrayal of the Jews. The trauma was still so very fresh. It still exists today, but then at that time, these were open wounds. And nevertheless, the state of Israel, Yad Vashem, the survivors, decided to give titles to members of the nations of the perpetrators, of the nations of the collaborators, and of those who stood by. And just to give you an example of how extraordinary this phenomenon is, in 1965, diplomatic relations between Germany and Israel were established, and the first German ambassador came to Israel. There were violent demonstrations against the relations and against the ambassador who had been a member of the Wehrmacht, a German soldier during the war. Nevertheless, the same year, 1965, 15 Germans were recognized as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem, and no one protested. The following year, 1966, a member of the Wehrmacht, a Wehrmacht soldier, was recognized as righteous among the nations, and again, there was no protest. So in this respect, it's something very unique. This ability of the victims, which I admire, victims of such a terrible crime, to say, yes, there were criminals, but there were also good Germans. Yes, there were also good Austrians, there were good Lithuanians and Poles, and so on. Obviously, they were motivated by a deep sense of gratitude. They were committed to remember the rescue, what was done for them. But I believe it also stemmed from a deep need of the survivors to remember that man was also capable of maintaining human values. And this is best expressed in a quote of Dr. Friedbaum, who in the First World Congress of Jewish Studies in 1947 that took place in Jerusalem, this is before the establishment of the state, there was a session dedicated to Yad Vashem, to the idea of Yad Vashem, and he said, we will not be able to live in a world which is entirely dark, and we shall not be able to rehabilitate ourselves if we will be surrounded only by a dark world. So there was this need to see something positive, to find hope. And in this respect, I think the program of the righteous, the honoring of the rescuers, is also an expression of the survivors' affirmation of life, of their resilience, of their faith in the future of mankind. Because if everything is dark, then there is no future. And although they had come face to face with ultimate evil, they were able not to sink into bitterness and revenge, but to rebuild their lives. And for this, they needed something positive, they needed hope. The outcome of this is an unprecedented phenomenon. Think of it, the Hall of Fame of Israel, the list of Israeli heroes is not only brave soldiers, brave first responders, scientists, people who contributed to society, but also Polish farmers, French teachers, Lithuanian housewives, yes, and soldiers of the German Wehrmacht. So I think we should always remember this when we think of the Righteous program. And the stories of the righteous are, of course, stories of extreme generosity and courage, but as we saw in the first story I told you, they're fraught with horror and suffering. They're stories of resilience and determination, but not only of the rescuers. We tend, obviously, to focus on the rescuers, but I think we should also remember that the Jews that they tried to survive were not simply recipients of help, but they also struggled for their survival. And it took enormous courage in order to go into hiding. It took enormous courage for Hannah, Sarah Matuson, to leave this column of marching wives under the eyes of the guards and to slip away. So this is something that we should also keep in mind. So now let's see who is entitled, who qualifies for the title of righteous among the nations. And for this, let's look at the story of the rescue of Maurice Stum. He was saved by a number of rescuers. Maurice was born in Liège in Belgium. His parents, Esther and Jacques Stum, had immigrated to Belgium from Poland. They probably hoped to better their lives and to have a good future for their son, but history didn't permit this. And on September 26, 1942, Esther and Jacques Stum were arrested in their home, taken to the Caserne d'Aussin, the Malines-Mechlin transit camp where the Jews of Belgium were concentrated before they were deported to Auschwitz. They were deported to Auschwitz. There seems to be no photo of Jacques Stum. We only have this tattered image of Esther Stum, who was deported in September 1942 to Auschwitz, where she perished. Maurice was not at home at the time of the arrest, and when he came home, he found the apartment empty. His parents had been taken away. So what does an 11-year-old boy do? He went to the neighbor. The neighbor apparently was very kind and she took him in, but she wasn't really sure what she should do with the boy. So what she did sounds very shocking, because she decided to take him to the police. I don't think she meant harm. I don't think she had any ulterior motive. She did what you normally do when a child is left alone. You take him to the police or you take him to social services. She apparently didn't think, was it stupidity? Was it lack of awareness of what was going on? Because the parents had been arrested in the same building. So she must have heard something, but she decided to go to the police. Fortunately for Maurice, the policeman at the station kicked them out. He told the woman, go back home, take the boy, go back home. Which she did. She followed suit. He may have also, he probably realized what the neighbor didn't realize, that if he now did what he was supposed to do, the boy would be arrested and taken also to the concentration point of the Jews. So he sent her home, by this saving Maurice's life. And he may also have contacted the underground, because the following day Maurice was told to go to a certain place, and there he was taken in charge by the underground. Now in Liège, in that city, there was a network of helpers, which was headed by a lawyer by the name of Albert Vandenberg. And it was supported, strongly supported by Louis-Joseph Kerckhoffs, the Bishop of Liège, the Catholic Bishop of Liège. And this underground helped a lot of children and other people to go into hiding. They also took Maurice. Maurice Stum was first in a convent, and then he arrived at the Arnoldi family. And Marcel and Celestine Arnoldi had 7 children. I believe they were devout Catholics. And after the war, Arnoldi told the story of how the boy came to him. And he said, I decided that if there was enough food for a family of 9, there was also enough for a family of 10. The couple lovingly took care of Maurice, and they hid him despite the danger. They hid him until the end of the war, and since he was left alone in the world, immigrant parents who had disappeared, the Arnoldis raised him until he was an adult. But if we want to know how it was, we have Maurice's testimony about how he was loved, but we also have this photo, and the saying goes, you know, a photo is worth 1,000 words. So look, this is a photo taken on the 20th anniversary, wedding anniversary of the Arnoldis. And so they took a photo, and you see the couple are seated behind the table. They are surrounded by their children, but who stands in the middle between the two with a wide smile on his face? Maurice Stum, who had arrived only a month earlier at their home. So this photo can tell us about how he was loved and taken care of. So who was recognized as righteous among the nations from this number of survivors? But first, I think I should say that this is an exception. The rescue stories are an exception. Maurice had several people who contributed to his rescue. Most Jews never encountered a rescuer. Most Jews were murdered without anyone helping them. So the context is always very important. So the righteous, as we saw in the law, are defined as those who risked their lives to save Jews. And what does this definition actually mean? It says that righteous are not merely people who helped, who rescued, but they're people who are willing to pay a price, who risk their lives or risk their liberty to save someone, which means actually they put someone else's well-being far above their own life and security. And this is a very important distinction. I think all of us have at one point or another in our lives, we did a good deed, but I never had to pay a price. I never had to take any risk. It never cost me anything. I'm, of course, a financial donation, but it was something I did, and I did not risk anything by doing that. The righteous did take enormous risks. And this is the basic definition of the righteous among the nations. So let's return to Maurice Stum's rescuers. We have Marcel and Celestine Arnoldi, who were recognized as righteous among the nations because they took in a boy. It was totally illegal. They hid him. They did not declare him to the authorities. So they were in great risk, and they were recognized. So were the members of the Liège Rescue Network, Monsignor Kerckhoffs and Albert van den Berg. In fact, Albert van den Berg paid with his life. He was arrested in 1943. He was taken to concentration camp and then moved to Neuengamme concentration camp. It's so tragic. He survived until liberation, but he was so weak that he died shortly afterwards. So he paid with his life. And then we have the neighbor who took the boy in, but brought him to the police. And we have the policeman who kicked them out and perhaps contacted the underground. But these were, first of all, we don't know their names, so they cannot be recognized. But what's important is that these were rescuers. They rescued Maurice, but this rescue did not involve any danger. So this shows you, I wanted to show the difference between the righteous who risked their lives and those who rescued, and their rescuers, and we should appreciate what they did. I don't want to belittle what they did, but there is a higher grade, and that is the righteous among the nations. But sounds easy, this definition. It's such a clear-cut definition. But of course, the situation in the Holocaust were very complex. And, you know, there were never black and white situations. There were always many shades of gray. So from the very beginning, it was decided that there would be a public commission which would examine each case and decide who is to be nominated as righteous among the nations. In this commission, you have here two photos, one from the 1960s and one from a few years ago. The commission, the memberships has changed, but the commission has for over 50 years examined thousands of files. And one more important thing is, from the beginning, Yad Vashem chairman in the 1960s realized that the decisions would sometimes be very difficult. So in order to ensure that there was due process and that the commission would have a systematic methodology, he decided that the commission would be chaired by a justice of the Israeli Supreme Court. The first justice was Moshe Landau, who, here you have him on the photo. He was one of the judges who passed judgment on Adolf Eichmann. So it's very, I think, symbolic that you have the judge who sat in trial of the perpetrator now also headed the commission that awarded titles to the rescuers. Then you had Justice Moshe Beisky, Justice Yaakov Maltz, and the commission nowadays is headed by Justice Yaakov Turkel, retired justice of the Israeli Supreme Court. And the commission is always challenged by terrible questions, difficult questions. They have to assess the risk, obviously. They have to examine the evidence. Is there enough evidence? And then they struggle with questions of motive, of the character of the rescuer, of the circumstances of the rescuer. And the decisions are not always easy because when a historian writes a book, he can write on the one hand, on the other side, he can show the different sides. The commission members, after they describe the different sides of the problem, the different perspectives, now have to take a clear-cut decision, yes or no. They have to draw a clear line in these very complex situations. And the righteous were not always saints or angels. And here I took a quote from a letter, which I found in the Yad Vashem archive, which Oskar Schindler, the famous Oskar Schindler from the Schindler's List, sent to Dr. Kurt Balkaduri in 1956. And he said, I'm far from being, very honestly, he says, I'm far from being a saint, and as a ruthless person, I have many more flaws than the large majority of people who live in a civilized way. And, you know, this is, I think, I don't know, he may have hinted at the notion that many of the decent, honorable people sat, looked on, did nothing, while he, the ruthless, far from being a saint person, acted and helped. So let's look at some of the questions. For example, one of the questions is, can an anti-Semite be righteous among the nations? It seems strange, but let's look at Zofia Kosak-Sztucka, a Polish author, a Catholic, devout Catholic, and she lived in Warsaw, and in the summer of 42, as the deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto began, she saw how hundreds of thousands of Jews were taken from the ghetto, and she knew exactly where they were going. So she decided, something which was extremely courageous, to write and distribute a pamphlet, which it's a long text. Here we have a quote where she says, "The silence can be tolerated no longer. No matter what its motives are, it is abominable. Those who remain silent in the face of murder become murderers' accomplices. Those who do not denounce it condone it. We Catholic Poles raise our voices." So this is a pamphlet with an exemplarily moral stand. But then she goes on to say, our feelings towards Jews have not changed. We continue to deem them political, economic, and ideological enemies of Poland. That's strong language. Moreover, we are aware that they hate us more than they hate Germans, that they blame us for their misfortune. This fact, however, does not release us from the duty of damnation of murder. So this woman created a committee. She did not only distribute this pamphlet, she created a committee of women who began helping Jews. And this committee eventually evolved into Żegota, this Polish Jewish rescue organization that helped thousands of Jews to go into hiding, paid for them, watched smuggled children out of the ghetto, and so on. So she was willing to risk her life to save the Jews that she deemed to be the worst enemies of Poland. And therefore, when the commission weighed these two sides, they decided to award her with the title of Righteous Among the Nations. And we'll find a lot of righteous, a lot of rescuers who have anti-Semitic views and even sometimes talk in a very, how shall I say, demeaning way to the Jews in hiding, calling them names and so on. Another problem which is often discussed by the Commission is payment. Many Jews paid for paid the rescuers for hiding. And let's take an example from Lvov, Lemberg, Lviv, different names of the same city. Today it's in Ukraine. It was before, it was during the war, it was in the occupied Poland. The murder of the Jews in Lviv began shortly after the German occupation in summer 1941. And then there was a ghetto created. And by May 1943, Ignacy Khirovsky realized that the ghetto would soon be liquidated. He had no one who was willing to help him, although he had money and could pay. The people he knew were either indifferent or hostile. And therefore, he decided that the only option that was open to him was to try and dig a tunnel and try to get into the sewer system of Lvov, into the underground tunnels of the sewer system to hide his family. Now think of the horror of the total despair of someone who decides to go into the sewers for an indefinite time. He did not know how long he would have to stay there. And he and a few friends began digging a tunnel. And as they entered the sewer system, they were searching for a place where they could bring their families to. They met sewer workers who were working in the maintenance of the system. And at the beginning, Chirovsky in his testimony said, they threatened to turn us in, and then he began begging them to help them. And there was one of them, he said, who had a round face. You see the photo of Leopold Socha, you see the round face, who got curious and said, I want to see where you are, and went back with them through the tunnel they had dug into the cellar where Chirovsky's wife and children were sitting. And apparently the sight of Paulina, Chirovsky's wife, and the two little children, Christina, who was 8 years old, and Pavel, who was 4 years old, it must have touched him. And Chirovsky said in his testimony that Socha seemed to be in fierce battle with himself. He was probably weighing the options, should I not? And then he decided, he said, I will help you, but you will have to pay me. And Chirovsky paid and was willing to pay. He also paid for the other Jews who joined them. And on May 31st, 1943, 21 Jews went into the sewer system. The testimonies, of course, are terrible. They come into this dark and damp and filthy and stinking place where there are worms all over with rats, and they take two children with them. Imagine the horror of this family and the other Jews. And Christina, in a testimony, described the painful existence there and how she missed the sunshine. And there was a grating at one point. There was in one of the tunnels, she could see the grating, and sometimes she could see a ray of sunshine, and she could hear the people in the street. And she described the pain of her parents, because these parents with the children, they could not protect their children. They saw how the children suffered. There was nothing they could do. They lost their authority and function. They tried to tell stories. They tried to keep the children busy, but they were basically very helpless. And Christina at one point says, Pavel was so afraid of the rats at the beginning, but then he got used to them and they became his pets, and he would feed them. There were horrible scenes. One of the elderly ladies died and they had to throw her body into the stream of the sewer. Some of the people in hiding couldn't stand it no longer and decided to leave. They just couldn't. They knew that danger awaited them outside, but they left, and none of them was heard of since. When Lviv was liberated, 10 of the 21 people who entered the sewer came out. And here again, Christina described how people were looking at them, people in the street were looking at them with horror. And she was so happy to see the sun again, but little Pavel cried. And she said, he wanted to return to the sewer. He was not used to the light and he was afraid of the people. The 4-year-old, the sewer, the dark world of the sewer had become his only surrounding. Socha and the survivors left Lvov. Lvov became Ukrainian. The Poles were able to leave. And but unfortunately, in May 1945, he was run over by a Soviet tank. And one of the survivors described that he lay fatally wounded in the street, and the Poles gathered around him and crossed themselves, but whispered to each other that this was punishment for him having saved Jews. To give you an idea of the fact that Socha was not only afraid of the Germans, he was also afraid of his neighbors, of someone denouncing him. The Chirovskis emigrated to Israel, and the stories never end with liberation, because now the Chirovsky found themselves in the other dramatic event in the life of the Jewish people in the 20th century. And here you have a photo of the two children, more or less in the age where they were when they went into the sewer. But Pavel Chirovsky was killed as a soldier in reserve duty in 1978. And this is a page from the website where all the fallen soldiers are commemorated. Now, how do we evaluate Socha? He was not a model citizen. He was involved, he was a petty criminal, he was involved in theft before the war. He actually used the sewers not only to hide Jews, but also to hide stolen goods. He was, on the other hand, he was deeply religious Catholic and respected the religion of his wards. He brought them a prayer book that he found in the abandoned ghetto. And Passover, he brought them extra potatoes because they couldn't eat bread. And he also brought them newspapers and kept them informed about what was going on in the outside world. But obviously, at least at the beginning, he was influenced by the promise of money. His initial motivation was probably financial. He hoped to make money. Money was offered and he took the money. But then the money ran out. Chirovsky had no more money. He sent Socha to a place where he had hidden some valuables, but then this fund was also exhausted. And he continued to support them. And it was not self-evident at the time of war to support so many Jews, to bring them food. So when the commission discussed his case, they weighed the two sides and decided that the second part, where they were unable to pay him any money and he continued to hide them, this tipped the scales and he was awarded the title of Righteous Among the Nations. There are many different issues the commission has to grapple with. For example, forced conversion. If the condition for hiding was forced conversion. What about adoption? Children that are adopted, a couple that saves a child, not because they want to save a Jewish child, but because they're childless and they want to adopt a child. And so on. So there are many, many such questions. And I tell you, the commission's work is admirable. Most of the commission members are survivors. So for many of them, these are situations which bring back terrible memories. And but their commitment is enormous. The question is often asked, is there a common denominator? How can is there a profile of righteous among the nations? And all I can tell you is that it is an extremely varied group. I personally cannot tell you of anything that I find that combines all of them. There's nothing typical. They are so different in terms of nations, age, men, women, education. You have very educated people among the righteous and illiterate peasants who don't even read and write. So education probably, unfortunately, is not a factor which makes people rescue, because if you look at the perpetrators, there were many very educated people among the perpetrators. But if you look at them, you see, you have here photos of different righteous. You see, they come from the city, they come from remote areas. You have all the religions, the Christian denominations represented. You have Muslim rescuers here. You have the Vesely family from Albania. There are other Muslims, different social strata. You have princes and royals and simple people. You have all professions. You have diplomats, and you have a zookeeper and his wife. You have soldiers. You have a circus director. All professions are represented. There are even in Berlin 2 prostitutes that were honored because they hid Jews. They were perhaps not considered decent by society, but they were definitely showed more moral standing than the so-called decent people. What were the motivations? So here you have Helene Jakob, a simple secretary from Berlin, who said, I had never been involved in any illegal activity, but my world fell apart and I wanted to protect it. So she was motivated by a moral standard. Then you have to take religious motivation. This Orthodox priest from Kiev, he was asked to hide a Jewish woman, and then he said that he thought with his wife all night, and they said, what kind of Christian would we be if we refused this poor woman who was reaching out to us and pleading for help? You have Maria Schul, who said, I was scared to death, like everybody, but I made up my mind right then, if I can help, I will. So she speaks of a spontaneous decision. Speaking of spontaneous decisions, I would like to tell you the story of Dorothea Neff, an actress in Vienna. She was a very well-known actress in the Volkstheater in Vienna. And she had a Jewish friend, a costume designer. And she, when many Germans cut off relations to Jews, she kept her friendship with her Jewish friend. And when in the end of 1941, her friend Lili Wolf received the order to present herself for deportation to the East, Dorothea Neff came to help her pack. She felt that this was the only thing she could do for her friend in this hour of need, and they were sitting at taking what she should take with her into the unknown destination. And then all of a sudden, she pushed the suitcase aside and said, I will hide you. It was a spur of the moment decision. And she described it after the war and said, as I looked into Lily's pale face, I was so overcome by compassion for this poor, abandoned human being that I knew I couldn't let her go off to face the unknown. And Dorothea Neff also didn't know what it meant that she was hiding Lily, because for another over 3 years, she hid her in her apartment, which meant that her life was now completely dominated by fear of discovery. This is Lili Wolf, the costume designer, who then emigrated to the United States. And I think she designed this dress for Miss America in the 1960s. Another spontaneous decision, but this time for someone, for a total stranger. Dorothea Neff helped her friend. Vera Bazzini from Italy helped total strangers. And her story is remarkable. She was a secretary in a tailor workshop. And one day, a person came to see her boss. It was Oscar Tedeschi. Oscar Tedeschi, when the deportations began, he went to a friend who promised to help them and hide them. And he, with his two children, wife and two children, went into hiding with his friend. But after 3 weeks, the friend said, I cannot keep you. I'm terrorized with fear. You have to leave. So Oscar Tedeschi was desperately looking for a new hiding place and went to an acquaintance that was the owner of this tailor shop. Vera Bazzini was sitting in her office and she heard the conversation through the door, and she realized that her boss was showing Tedeschi the door, that he would not help him. Now, she could have very well immersed herself in her work, said, I haven't heard anything. It's not someone I know. If my boss won't help him, why should I? How can I help him? How can I stand up against the might of the German state? No, she went to Oscar Tedeschi as he was leaving and said, come with me. She took him to her parents, and the Tedeschis survived the war thanks to Vera Bazzini and her parents, who were willing to rescue a total stranger. You have here her name engraved. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a photo of her, but you have the name engraved on the wall of the righteous, in the garden of the righteous. So these were spontaneous decisions by people who, for different motivations, decided at some point that they had to act. Until that moment, they were what we call bystanders. Until that moment, they watched on as Jews were being deprived of their rights, their properties confiscated. They were marked with a yellow star or with an armband. But there was one point where they said, this is a red line which I'm not willing to cross. This, enough is enough, and now I have to act. And it is this moment which is so difficult to characterize. I'm always filled with awe when I think of these people taking these fateful decisions. It's mind-boggling. Yeah. So now perhaps I would like to talk also about how such cases are discovered and how they unfold. In many cases, it is the survivor who turns to Yad Vashem and says, I was saved, and they give testimony. But in some cases, it can begin with an email, with a message, with someone who heard something. And the following case is the rescue of Erich Gottschalk by the Kus family in Poland, which began when Yad Vashem employee of the archive went on vacation to Poland, and he came back, he went into my office, and he put a big stack of old letters on my desk and said, these letters were given to me by the son of Jan Kush in the Lublin area. He cannot read them, they are in German, but he says his parents rescued a Jew. I opened the letters and I saw that they were written by Erich Gottschalk from Holland in German. He was telling the Kush family how his life was. He started writing immediately after his return to Holland, and he wrote to them how difficult it was, how the realization began to dawn on him that his wife and child will not return. And he always thanked them in many words for what they did for him. But of course, because he wrote to the people who knew him, he didn't write why he was so grateful. The family said that they hid Erich Gottschalk, but we tried now to find the story. It was obvious that Erich Gottschalk was no longer alive. We began looking in the archive and found his name in the victims database. And there was a page filled out by a distant relative. So we contacted the distant relative and he told us what he knew. But we also found the name of Erich Gottschalk in deportation lists. We looked for his restitution file where he described how he was deported, and he was deported to Auschwitz. He was then taken on a death march and escaped from the death march and was taken in by a Polish family, and they saved him until the end of the war. So now the two halves of the story connected. We contacted, he remarried, there were no children. His second wife was non-Jewish, but her relatives were very helpful and said, yes, they remembered old Erich Gottschalk, who used to talk about how he was helped by a Polish family. So this was enough in order to create, to put the pieces together and connect the different elements into a story. And then we discovered that he was also commemorated by his hometown, Bochum in Germany. A school there in 2013 was interested in Jews in sports, and since Erich Gottschalk was an amateur soccer player, they wrote his story in Bochum. So now we had a whole story. The Kusch family were recognized. Jan and Magdalena Kusch, where the ceremony took place in Warsaw in November 2018. And, but I think that one of the big advantages was also that not only were his rescuers honored, but we also now have a full story, and Erich Gottschalk's story in the Holocaust is now fully as possible documented at Yad Vashem. I think this is also very important. Of course, you don't always manage. In many cases, we're left with fragments and there are no sources. Hiding was conducted in secret, so it left no traces in archives in most cases. And in some cases, we don't know enough about the circumstances. In some cases, the rescuers and the people they tried to save were caught and killed and no trace was left. But, and perhaps if I have 2 more minutes, I would like to also show you that there's some cases where you have false stories. Sometimes it's a distortion, people want to whitewash their family's past. Sometimes it's a myth that is passed down from generation to generation. And you have to work very hard these were Erich Gottschalk's wife and child. Little Renee was born in Westerbork in the transit camp. She never saw life outside the camp, and his wife Rose and the little girl Renee who were killed. So let's move to such a story. I'm going back to stories where there's family myth. I got an email a few years ago from a woman in the United States who said she was originally from Germany, and in her family, they had the story of them helping their neighbors, and they had neighbors who refused to wear the yellow star, and therefore they did not dare go out in the street, and her family, her grandparents, helped and bought the food for the family, And she said, my mother would crawl under the fence and bring them the food. And then one day they disappeared. They disappeared. And she wrote, as you know, the Jews were taken at night, so no one would see. It was a clandestine operation. And therefore, my parents never knew. And they thought perhaps the Jews had managed to run away, to escape. But now, recently, stumbling stones were laid in Ludwigshafen in our town. And we realized that they were murdered in the Holocaust. Stumbling stones are these stones that are put in front of buildings where Jewish victims used to live to commemorate the fact that here in this building were Jews. And here are the stumbling stones of the Wilheimer family, these neighbors that this person said her family tried to help. Now, the story is completely false. I don't think this woman was trying to mislead us. I think there was a story in the family, and each generation added something to it. And, it's very difficult to think that perhaps your grandparents, whom you love, perhaps were simple bystanders. Here, the historical facts completely contradicted the story. Because the Jews in Ludwigsburg were taken in October 1940 and deported over the border into France, where they were put in the Gurs camp under terrible conditions. Many of them died in the camp. Others were deported, and only few managed to get out of the camp or were rescued by rescue networks, not the Weilheimer family. So this was in October 1940. The Jewish star was imposed a year later. So it couldn't be that the Weilheimers did not want to wear the Jewish star. They never knew that there was a Jewish star. Also, the story of the girl crawling under the fence is not something that fits the circumstances in Germany. It was probably something, an idea from a film about the Warsaw Ghetto, perhaps the smugglers of the Warsaw Ghetto. But then we come to her writing that, the Jews disappeared one night. They were deported in the dark and in hiding. Here are photos of the deportation of the Jews of Ludwigshafen, on October 22nd, 1940, not 44, this is a mistake, sorry. So you see, we know that they received notice in the morning that they were to pack their stuff and present themselves at the assembly point. They were taken by buses. You see them here in daylight in the streets. And if you look at this photo, you see here this woman in the window who is looking down. Everybody saw it. The neighbors saw it. People saw it. They were in the street with their suitcases. It was clear. They must have heard the panic of these Jews as they were packing and taking their belongings, going to the unknown. You see, I gave you the example of this story to show you that very often there are questions of memory and history, and they don't always go together. And to end my presentation, I would like to mention Lorenzo Perone, an Italian simple worker. He came to Auschwitz not as an inmate, but as a worker. He was hired to do a job. People from all over Europe were taken by the Germans. They were paid, they did work, and then they returned home. Lorenzo Perone was taken to do work in Auschwitz-Monowitz in the industrial complex that was part of the Auschwitz camp system. And there, he somehow met Primo Levi, the Jewish intellectual, the chemist. The two were from completely different social groups, the intellectual and the simple worker, and they probably would have never met in Italy. And if, then it would have been for Perone to come and work, do some handy job in Levi's home. But in Auschwitz, they were on different levels. Primo Levi was an inmate, he was at the lowest of the low, and Perone was a worker who had rights. They were not allowed to talk to the prisoners, but Perone decided to help. He recognized they had the same Italian, they were, he recognized that there was a person who was speaking Italian, and he brought Primo Levi food. He gave him clothing, and he sent postcards or letters to Primo Levi's wife, who was mother, who was back in Italy. And this is how Primo Levi, in his book, If This Is a Man, wrote of Lorenzo. I believe that it was really due to Lorenzo that I'm alive today, and not so much for his material aid as for his having constantly reminded me by his presence that there still existed a just world outside our own, something and someone still pure and whole, for which it was worth surviving. And if you want, this is the essence of the righteous among the nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are many, many comments and conversations in the chat room. I will absolutely send you the transcript so you can read everything. I'm going to read out a few of the questions. I apologize to those that I will skip over. At the end of the Q&A, we will have time to open microphones so that people can say thank you and share some of these amazing stories that you've written in the chat room. The first question I'll ask is, I won't pronounce the name because I will probably not pronounce it correctly, but where does the name or term righteous among the nations come from? Why was it chosen as such?
Well, that's an excellent question. Righteous among the nations is the term Chasidei Umot HaOlam, which is a term which is very an old term in Jewish tradition. Maimonides used it to define non-Jews who help Jews in time of need. And it was, why was it taken? I think we find this term even during the Holocaust in several instances which are totally unrelated. You find it in the Ringelblum archive in Warsaw, where they describe the acts of someone who helped Jews, and they say he is a Chasid Umot Olam, righteous among the nations. You find it in memoirs. So many different people took this term when they wanted to speak of the rescuers. And at the same time, also this term was used by Mordechai Shenhavi, who designed the first ideas about Yad Vashem. While the war was still going on, he was sitting in his kibbutz in Israel and making plans for the commemoration of the victims. And he also used this term. So I think it was simply absolutely normal to take this term from the tradition and apply it for the righteous among the nations. The interesting part is that if you look at old dictionaries and you look for the term righteous among the nations, Chasid Umot Olam in Hebrew, you will find that in the old dictionaries, it gives the Maimonides definition and the old definition. In the modern day dictionaries, it will already speak of rescuers during the Holocaust. This has become the first meaning of this term.
Thank you very much. There was a question regarding recording this event. So yes, this event is being recorded. I have put in the chat several times the link. I'm sorry, my microphone was off. There was a question for me regarding recording this event. So yes, this event has been recorded. I just put our link into the chat once more of our website where you can see future events and also the past events which have been recorded. Hopefully this event will go online in a few days. There is a slightly controversial question. I will ask it anyway. Steve asked, while these are amazing stories, how ordinary people did amazing things, I was wondering if there is an opposite type of recognition and acknowledgement of that might teach other equally important lessons, how seemingly ordinary people who did horrible things, turning in their neighbors, reported things to authorities, took advantage, and worse. I think more powerful lessons can be learned about how regular normal people did somehow horrible things.
Well, I don't fully agree. I agree with the part which says we have more to learn from the normal people because we are all normal people, bystanders, and therefore we should look at them to see how sometimes how you can slip into becoming doing evil things. But I don't think that there should be a list of perpetrators or collaborators, because this list would be endless. And you have the trials, but you have history books that are filled with the stories of the history of the perpetrators, the sociology of the perpetrators, and of the bystanders, if there is such a thing. Because the question always is, if you are indifferent, is this bystanding or is this taking a stand, deciding to be indifferent? But I agree that we have to learn. I think we are not, most of us are not perpetrators, and most of us certainly are not righteous among the nations. We are the people in the middle, and we have to learn how we should be more careful, more observant, more compassionate. I think it would be self-righteous to demand that people sacrifice themselves as the righteous among the nations did, but at least not to be indifferent, not to close our eyes. So yeah, it's a vast topic.
Thank you very much. I know I promised to ask only one question at a time, but there are three questions that are very close on topic, and they each kind of open another part of the topic. So Ellie asked, I understand that Sir Nicholas Winton could not be recognized as righteous among the nation because he was halachically Jewish. Is there any other way for his contribution to rescuing Jews to be recognized by Yad Vashem? That's one question. And then Paula asked, perhaps similar to the question about Winton, but I think there is a gap in remembering the righteous. So many Jews were responsible for saving other Jews. For example, Weizmandel, the Jews in Zigota, etc. And then Pam also asked, have Jews who rescued or helped Jews been recognized by Yad Vashem?
Okay, let's start with Winton. The thing about Winton being halachically Jewish, that is not the reason he was not recognized. Winton is a hero. He was this wonderful man who took off a year in his life in order to help get the children of the Kindertransport from Prague to Britain. He's admirable. He was, by the way, celebrated by Yad Vashem. There was a big event with him, but there was no danger. There was no risk to him because the children were let out by the German authorities. This was not something illegal. And yes, of course, we all feel uncomfortable in a way that this admirable person was not honored. as a righteous among the nations. But then again, you have to work with the same definition, because otherwise, in the end, everybody is entitled to receive the title. So it's always a big dilemma between keeping the criteria of the commission. And, in every criteria, you always have some cases where you say, I wish we could have a different way. In the beginning, by the way, there was a time when the commission decided on grading the heroism of, there was grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 of the righteous among the nations. Soon they realized that there too, the border between the two was always blurred, and therefore it was decided to reunite the title. If we come to Jews, Jewish rescuers, this is also, a bit false to say that Jewish rescuers were not, there was no attention paid to them. On the contrary, when you look at the early writings that were published by Yad Vashem and others, they're filled with these stories. You look at testimonies of survivors. I think every survivor will have a moment in his story where he was helped by a Jew. The righteous are an exception. The Jewish helpers are more of a rule. And for example, the first scientific conference in Yad Vashem, I now don't remember when exactly, but it was in the 70s, I think, was about rescue. And there were big chapters about the Jewish rescuers. There is no award, there's no medal. And I can understand why, we always feel that there's Jewish solidarity, so it is more expected that a Jew will help a Jew. When you look at these righteous among the nations, they could have very well stayed safely in their position and not get involved in, the Germans were killing the Jews, and they could have, desisted from doing anything, like Vera Bazzini, who decided to act. So this is an exception, and this is something she had no obligation, no solidarity obligation with the Tedeschis. But the Jewish helpers, and Weissmandl is only one from many, and he worked with others, are commemorated in the story in educational work. This is very important in educational work. But there's no official award.
Thank you very much. Has there been a shift in honoring motivation with the death of Holocaust survivors and living memory fading?
Well, as far as I know, I retired about 3 years ago, but I think it's still, the Department of the Righteous Among the Nations in Yad Vashem receives still hundreds of applications every year. They now come very often from second generation, third generation. The commission requires evidence and bases itself mostly on survivor testimony. So now that the survivor generation, unfortunately, is leaving us, and this is, of course, very sad, but today, technology helps us. I showed the documenting the story of the rescue of Erich Gottschalk. He was no longer alive when the letters arrived at Yad Vashem. So today, because at the click of a mouse, I can contact the archive of the restitution files, and I can contact the Owlsen, the Red Cross archive, and I can write to people, museums, scholars all over the world. There are many, many collections of testimonies. There are search engines on the web. How I was introduced to Facebook, I one day discovered that one of the staff of the Department of the Righteous Among the Nations was searching for family members of a survivor with her Facebook account. And then I said, what is this? And she showed me. So today, the possibilities of research are expanding enormously. Yes, the survivors are gone, but if there are traces left, I think they can be found. So it's changed the nature of the work of the Department of the Righteous, but the criteria basically remain the same. We need a testimony of the survivor, or in some cases, other documents, for example, a police interrogation. If a person was hidden and caught, and then you have the police interrogation where the whole story unfolds. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I apologize, that question was asked by Peter. Avron requests, can you please speak a little about the creation of the special category honoring the righteous diplomats?
Okay. Diplomats, as we all know, are protected by diplomatic immunity. So, and the Germans respected diplomatic immunity. Obviously, a diplomat who helps did not risk his life. He had nothing to fear from the Germans. But if a diplomat, and this in most cases is what diplomats did, helped by Jews by giving them visas against their government's policy, they risked their jobs. So compared to losing one's life, obviously this seems to be a small matter. But, you know, losing your job, a diplomat who worked hard to have a career in the Foreign Service, deciding to put everything at risk and disobey and act against the policy of your country and your superiors is no small matter. So you have, for example, the Japanese consul in Kovna who gave visas, although Tokyo had not okayed it. You have the Portuguese consul in France, Mendes de Souza, who gave visas to Jews, transit visas to Jews for Portugal, and he was fired from his position. This was also the case, for example, not a diplomat, but a Swiss border guard who let Jews in. He was put on trial. He was fired. He lost his pension. Diplomats are, in fact, a special case. And a number of diplomats were recognized. And one of them who worked with Raoul Wallenberg, Per Anger, the Swedish diplomat, he has a fascinating testimony where he says they arrived in Budapest and what was going on, he said, there was nothing in our books that told us how we should deal with these situations. You know, when you find that hundreds of Jews are queuing at the doors of your embassy, and he said there was nothing in our books that told us how to handle such a situation. And the righteous diplomats were the ones who realized that in extraordinary times, you needed extraordinary measures.
Thank you so much. Once again, I apologize to everyone who wrote in a question that I did not read out. I think it's a perfect note to end with that statement. It was beautiful. Thank you, Irena. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm going to open the microphone so that people can thank you personally. And if anyone has any more remarks, you're welcome to participate. please be courteous with the microphones.
Thank you
Thank
so
you and
much.
good evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Beautiful story.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Such bravery.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So inspiring. I want to ask, can you do more of these? Those stories are so remarkable. Can you maybe do like a whole series on those? Maybe like give it a 2-month gap, but it's incredibly inspiring and uplifting stories. I'd love to hear more about the different righteous people.
We will absolutely try to get more of these in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
תודה רבה, היה מרתק.
תודה.
Irena, I just want to thank you so much for sharing those stories. My heart is just full. Thank you.
Thank you.
Irena, hello, Irena.
Yeah.
I have a question. There was one Egyptian righteous among nations who refused to accept or to attend the celebration or the giving of the award. Is this the unique case where people were awarded? Because we're talking about 28,000 people. Were there many that refused to accept the title?
Not for political reasons. By the way, the family of Dr. Helmi, there was one nephew who accepted the award, and there was a ceremony in Berlin where he accepted the award from the hands of the Israeli ambassador. But there were refusals, but in many cases, it was, I'm thinking of some Poles who were afraid of their neighbors even after the war and didn't want the neighbors to know that they had saved Jews. We had the granddaughter of one of them who was recognized in the very beginning of the program, and only in 2013, she came forward and said, I want the medal of my grandfather. Her grandfather didn't want the ceremony, he didn't want. There were some who, for political reasons, anti-Israel, refused, but it's really exceptional cases. In most cases, the award is very much welcome.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank you for listening. And as I always said, you know, it's not me that makes the stories, it's the stories that carry me. And this is one thing when you deal with this topic, and I think all the staff of the Department of the Righteous Among the Nations will tell you, they feel that someone is, holding them and pushing them forward. It's not us, it's them, the survivors and the righteous.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Once again, thank you all very much, and we'll see you in our next events. In our coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very inspiring.
Thank you.
מאוד מאוד
Thank you very
מזעזע.
much.
כל הכבוד.
Thank you. Thank you.
תודה רבה, היה מרתק.
אני
Thank you so much. It was really amazing.
Leila Tov from Jerusalem.